July 5th, 6:30 p.m. City Council meeting. At this time, we will stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and prayer. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father God, we just come to you, Lord, just thanking you, Lord, for all that you do for us, Lord. Thanking you for this city, Lord, and for all the citizens, Lord, and just the blessings that you have bestowed on us, Lord. And God, I just thank you that we have so many working so hard to improve our city, Lord. And I just thank you that we've had some activities, Lord, that have really been something that the citizens have been asking for, Lord. And I'm just thankful that we have people that are willing to work hard, Lord, for our citizens, Lord. And I just ask special blessings upon them, Lord. And God, I just ask you that you would keep us good stewards with with the citizens' money, Lord God. And I just ask that you keep us focused on your principles, Lord, and your that you teach us in the scripture, Lord, and that we continue, Lord, to just look toward you for the answers. And I just thank you for your scripture, Lord. I thank you for your rule, for your your purposes and your procedures that you give us, Lord, through scripture, that we are to be able to live an abundant life, Lord. And I just praise you, Lord, and I thank you for your son, and I just pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. And at this time, we'll have questions and comments from any citizen, if anybody would like to speak at this time. And I see none, so we'll move on to the consent items 5, 6, and 7. If there's anything to discuss or questions or anything. If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve consent items 5, 6, and 7.
Second.
And all in favor? And it passes. And moving on to item 8, receive the final report, conduct a public hearing, and then take appropriate action to introduce on first reading ordinance O-006-22, adopting the proposed unified land development ordinance to replace Chapter 10 subdivisions, Chapter 14 zoning and Article 1.04 boards and commissions, Division 2 planning and zoning commissions, Article 3.13 manufactured homes, and Article 3.14 signs of the Borger Code of Ordinance, and adopting a new zoning map. Mr. Spradlin.
So I'll kind of start off at, this project has been quite lengthy and very detailed. This all started back in 2018 when we started the process of adopting a new comprehensive plan. And after that process, one of the strategic action priorities of that comprehensive plan was to update our development regulations. So we started this project in December of 2020. And I know the council has been involved in several of the meetings as we've gone through each phase. We've had 3 different public open houses to go through these. We've worked with the Ordinance Advisory Committee that was appointed from the members of our other advisory committees, and with the Planning and Zoning Commission. So following all of the community's outreach and staff's review, we're finally to the point of taking the first step to actually adopting the new regulations. We call this a unified land development ordinance because it takes all of our previous regulations that were in, as you can see by the lengthy wording that the mayor just said, kind of scattered throughout our code of ordinances, and it puts it in one chapter and puts all of that together. It also updates a lot of our regulations. Our regulations were adopted back with the first zoning map and the first zoning provisions in 1964. So a lot has changed since 1964 in housing and land development processes and procedures. So this is updating that. In many cases, it makes things a little easier and more clearly defined. We add a lot more graphics in this new process so that we can kind of show and educate, how that is supposed to be. And then it complies with all of the specifications outlined in the comprehensive plan for our future development. So this ordinance, once in effect, will of course replace all of those, and then we will also adopt a new zoning map. Most of the zoning is fairly similar, but there are two new zoning areas. One is called a corridor mixed use, and then we're redoing the downtown area quite significantly. Other than that, most things are fairly similar, other than just a few updated regulations. But with that, I'll turn it over to Brian with Kinder Keys, who's been guiding the city through this over the last 20 months.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Brian Mabry, Kinder Keys Collaborative. Glad to be here on this final presentation for you all to listen to. You can go to the next slide here. Just going to give a little bit more background, get into the contents of the document, talk a minute about the development guidebook, welcome any questions or comments, and then of course you're voting to adopt it or not. Just to clarify, and there's a few, you all know this because I've said it so many times, but the difference between this project and the comprehensive plan project or the downtown plan project or the parks plan project that we've done is that those plan documents are more like a menu at a restaurant, and this is more like the cookbook for how you make the stuff on the menu. This is more specific, and it has more legal binding to it than what a plan does. A plan, comprehensive plan or a parks plan or a downtown plan, sets a vision and sets policies for how the city thinks it wants to grow in the future. But a ULDO is the legal document that helps get the city going in that direction. And so that's the difference. Some things that this document are shown on your screen, but it's combining your existing regulations into one document. That helps with usability and enforcement and administration because it's all in one spot, and helps us as we're drafting and going through for the past 2 years or so. Get rid of inconsistencies and duplications that were inconsistent with each other, and making it a more streamlined document. You can go to the next slide. Some things that this document is not is that, and it's a little hard to see, and I want to be near, let me do it from over here. It's not a property tax policy, so it doesn't set property taxes or a tax rate for any particular part of the city. It's not annexation. It doesn't set for areas that should be annexed in the future. It's not a capital improvements program, so it doesn't set a budget or a schedule for doing improvements to streets or utilities. It's not the building code. It has some similarities, but it's not about really the ventilation or heating and air conditioning or plumbing or electrical that goes on within a building. It isn't construction standards either, which is about how streets are built and their base and sub-base and curb and gutter and all that kind of stuff. And then it's not a property maintenance or nuisance code. It doesn't force someone who just has a property sitting there to improve it and bring it up to a safe standard. It's if someone proposes to maybe change the land use going on that property or to build on to an existing structure there, then the ULDO comes into play. But if it's just a house or a building sitting there and not doing anything, it doesn't really have any bearing on it either. A ULDO is about land uses taking place on private property and the kinds of parking and landscaping and signs that are allowed on that property. So we're at the end of the timeline here, starting on the ULDO part of this overall big project in October of 2020. We've had our Planning and Zoning Commission a week ago, yesterday, where they recommended adoption to you all unanimously after a public hearing. No one spoke at the public hearing in favor or against, from the audience at least, and then the P&Z did their thing and have given you a positive recommendation. This document's drafted in 3 modules: zoning districts and land uses, and the dimensional standards, which are the setbacks and the building heights, were in the first module. Second module had to do with landscaping, signs, some building design, and your subdivision standards. And then the third was about administration and procedures and how things get approved from start to finish. I have in the next few slides, well, this slide shows lists out each of the zoning districts that are in the ULDO. Just to go through them so everyone knows, and that's in the audience and everything, there's 4 residential districts: residential estate, general residential, semi-urban residential, and multifamily. And then for mixed use, there's the downtown and the corridor mixed use that Garrett mentioned earlier. Mixed use is a more popular thing nowadays than it was in 1964. In 1964, zoning was about keeping things separated out, keeping a business separate from the houses, separate from the factories and the industries, trying to keep them as far apart as possible so they don't interfere with each other. Well, nowadays, mixed use is more in vogue and has been for a while, where it's thought of as appropriate to allow a little bit of residential and commercial to be intermingled with each other so that people can live closer to where they work and live closer to where they shop, and they don't have to travel as far to get to where they want to go. And with the way gas prices are, that's probably a good thing. Non-residential districts, there are 4 non-residential districts: suburban commercial. Think of it as more of the big box Walmart type developments. Commercial, which is a little more intense and might be more in town and not quite as suburban. And then 2 industrial, light industrial and heavy industrial. And then we have a public and institutional zoning district, which would be for your parks and your civic clubs and things of that nature. This is an excerpt. The next 3 slides show an excerpt from the ULDO, just showing the zoning districts and what their purposes are. Each zoning district has a purpose statement. So in the future, when someone is going to request a new, different kind of zoning for their property than what's already there, part of that discussion and analysis from you all and from staff can be looking at that purpose statement and what that zoning district is geared toward. And each of those purpose statements are there for those zoning districts. You can scroll through those. The zoning map is here, and it's also on display out in the lobby. It, like Garrett said, carries over much of what you had as far as your zoning district goes. The new piece being the suburban mixed use, and sorry, Garrett, I'm blanking. Is downtown brand new, or was it?
It's changed
Sorry.
a lot from the what was the central business district.
Okay, that's it then. Next slide. One big change, I would say, that really brings this document into modern, contemporary best practices for zoning documents are these development types. These are optional, really, in all different areas, but conventional is sort of what you would normally think of for most subdivisions nowadays, where you got single-family fenced-in yards, served by streets, obviously. The park-oriented is a new one, and we wanted to give an incentive for future developments in the city to be located near your existing parks that you've invested in and that you're paying for already, and that can be amenities for new residents in the future. And so in this park-oriented development type, which can take place in the general residential or the semi-urban residential, if someone does one of these subdivisions within a quarter mile of an existing park, then they get more houses than what they would have been able to do if they had developed it further out away from a park. So that's just an incentive to attract more residential development near your existing parks. This is a sort of a run-through or a comparison of 2 different properties that are roughly the same size, 13 acres, and this is purely theoretical just to get the point across. There could be unusual things about these properties that I don't know about that wouldn't make this possible, but just for argument's sake. That top one, there's no park nearby, and that lower one is near Cofield Park. They both have general residential zoning in this scenario. That one at the top could have 78 houses with that general residential zoning district. But if they're close to a park, like in the lower right, then they get 10 more lots or 10 more houses out of the deal. than what they normally would have had on a same size property that's farther away from a park. So in exchange for these locating close to a park like this, then there's a 13% incentive as far as the number of houses that could be built for that developer or subdivider. An important part of any document like this is the use table. It's highly different from your old way of listing out uses in each district. This is a more succinct way of seeing what's allowed in each of the districts. Tap the next slide, Garrett. There's 2 columns there, kind of categories of uses on the left, and then very specific land uses listed on that second column, if you tap it again. That top line is medical or dental clinic, just as an example. That means that this land use, where you see the Ps there for the downtown area and the central mixed use and the suburban commercial and the commercial and the light industrial and the public and institutional, where all those Ps are, that type of business is just allowed. They just go through the normal process to get building permit approval and all of that. In the multifamily residential, though, there's an L there. That means that there are certain standards in the multifamily residential for a medical clinic that they have to live up to in order to locate there. And in this case, that's just a 3,000 square foot gross floor area. That means the building can be a maximum of 3,000 square feet. Anywhere else, it can be as big as it wants to, but in order to have this sort of mix of uses like I was talking about, this medical or dental clinic, if it's going to be in a multifamily residential district, has to be a little smaller than what it might have been anywhere else in the city, just to keep the scale lower since it's going to be near residences. There are accessory use standards and structure standards in the ULDO about fences and about home occupations, outdoor display, dumpsters. There's also temporary uses and structures. There's a table showing where each of these temporary uses are permitted and some standards that go along with them. Changing gears a little bit, there are building standards, especially related to apartments, so that in the future, when apartments are built in Borger, they will be not just boxes, but have a little variety to their design on the exterior. You can see on the lower right there, that schematic of an apartment shows what you could see based on the standards that are in this document. Varying roof pitches and varying window placement and things like that. Again, as just opposed to a rectangular box with no design to it. And that often can ease some frustrations or some concerns from neighboring property owners if they find out an apartment building is proposed near their residence. Then if they know it's going to be built with some design to it, then that can help with some of the concerns about that. Parking has really changed a lot since 1964. Generally, in zoning and planning, you end up with less parking per square foot than what would have been more common in the 60s. It's been that buildings have been designed to accommodate Black Friday, or parking lots have been designed to accommodate Black Friday traffic once a year or twice a year. But that is not the norm anymore, especially now. And so there are, instead of, for example, a retail store needing one space per 200 square feet of the building, it's much more common to say one per 300 or one per 250 or one per 350 even, so that there's fewer spaces compared to the size of the building than there was 50 years ago when the original ordinance was written. There's a lot of graphics still also in this section, is how to measure parking spaces and what we mean by the depth of a space and its width and aisle width and all those kinds of measurements. We also have provisions for loading and for stacking. Stacking is there on the right, where a certain number of car spaces are needed in order to accommodate cars at things like drive-throughs for fast food restaurants, for example, or for banks, or for even mini warehouses where there's a keypad. There needs to be enough stacking spaces for cars to not be sticking out into the street and causing unsafe stuff there happening in the street. Landscaping, there's several provisions related to that, trying to keep in mind the climate we have here and not just going completely overboard and requiring lush landscaping, understanding that it's a drier climate out here than what you're going to have in some other places. So different types of landscaping in the parking lot and between land uses for buffer yards, between something like a higher intensity industrial use and a residence next door, then that industrial use would need to provide some buffering in between in order to not have negative impacts on the house that it's locating next to. Signs have changed also a lot. You can't have regulations on signs that are based on the kind of sign that it is or what its purpose is or what it says based on a Supreme Court decision from 5 or 6 years ago. You can't have things like real estate signs anymore. It has to be more like H-frame sign or A-frame sign or monument sign. It can't be church sign or apartment sign. Those kind of things. We went through and cleaned up your sign regulations and made it clear about the number of signs allowed, their height, the maximum height that they can be, if they're wall signs, how far they can project off of a building, how they can be lit, and if a permit is required. Some signs don't require permits, just having a A-frame sign out in front of a business doesn't require a permit, but having a permanent monument sign out in front would. Lighting, there are requirements that basically just require that they don't bleed onto other properties and cause a glare or a nuisance, or that they don't glare onto streets and cause a traffic problem. Subdivision standards, there are standards in the ULDO related to sidewalk placement and width, block width and length, where easements are placed, public water and wastewater systems. Some of these get elaborated on documents that the Public Works Department administers, and that I think will be coming up with some new stuff related to that in the future, not part of this project, but just from what I've heard. And then how the process that a subdivider goes through to dedicate those streets and sidewalks and utilities to the city and the city accepting them for maintenance. There were floodplain regulations in your existing standards that really weren't touched that much. They were just brought over and cleaned up a little bit into your ULDO. Then the third phase, as I've mentioned, the third piece of this is the procedural aspects. We've got a section or an article on administrative bodies where we spell out what the responsibilities are for each of the groups listed up there: City Council, P&Z, Board of Adjustment, even staff members, what they can review and what they can take action on, whether it's approve or disapprove. There's some other stuff in this article related to what's some good ones to pick out here. Conflicts. If someone later, we hope there aren't any conflicts, but if one slipped by us, or if in the future you change the code to where a conflict is created, then whatever is written in words controls over any tables that are in there if there's a conflict between the two, and also the written part controls over any graphics that are in there. So that just gives, if someone says, hey, well, this graphic shows I can do this, well, Garrett and staff can point to, well, in the words here, though, it says you have to do such and such. For future annexations that might happen, this is just again, another theoretical example. What the property's zoning would be if it were annexed. The ULDO calls out that the zoning of any annexed property would be what's recommended in the comprehensive plan on the future land use map, unless the applicant, the property owner, wants something different. Then the default is going to be whatever the the future land use map and the comprehensive plan recommends for that particular piece of property. This just lists out the 4 different kinds of applications and gives a description of them. There's administrative that staff takes action on, legislative that basically you all take action on, quasi-judicial, which the Board of Adjustment takes action on, and then subdivision, which is mostly staff as well. And those specific kinds of procedures and applications are shown here grouped in their 4 different areas. Completeness is an important thing so that staff isn't wasting time reviewing applications that aren't well thought out and are only halfway done or less. That's important because the state statute review timelines and requirements start once the city accepts an application. So we don't want them to accept a shoddy application for a subdivision plat or a special use permit or something else that, and then they're suddenly under the gun to get action taken on it when it's not everything that they need in order to make a smart decision on it. So the ULDO spells out what a complete application is. If someone attempts to submit something that isn't complete, the staff can give it back to them and say this is not accepted yet for purposes of that timeline and that ticking clock, and the applicant can put their start over, or not necessarily start over, but add to what they've submitted, whether it was a missing fee or a missing part on the application or a missing drawing they needed to provide, and then turn it in again and get going with their project. There are some other parts to the review procedures that we have, basically consolidating things again like we've did with some of the zoning districts and with the documents we're putting together, just consolidating the review procedures into one article, having very clear criteria for, especially for staff again, to make decisions on different applications, so that things are there in black and white and they can confidently approve or disapprove things that get submitted that the staff has the authority to approve or disapprove. There's a big table in the procedural part of the ULDO that shows, this is an excerpt of it, shows each development review application on the left. It gives a cross-reference to standards that relate to that application. So for example, signs, a sign permit application points to the sign standards that are in the ULDO. It gives a few other things, some timing for when a sign permit, for example, is needed. Obviously, it's before putting up a sign. Giving a duration or an expiration for if the person never acts on the approved application, like they get an approved sign permit but never build a sign, then then it expires in a certain number of months, and then some other information there in that table. You can go to the next one. Addressing nonconformities or grandfathering. This ULDO lists out several different types of nonconformities and also allows certain smaller changes to take place to like a non-conforming use or a non-conforming structure without having to go through a big red tape to get it done. Different kinds of enforcement remedies are listed out in the ULDO, whether it's the ability to do stop work orders if there's a violation on a site that's under construction, suspending permits for someone who's sort of a habitual violator, revoking permits, withholding permits, assessing fines. That would really have to go through the judicial process, but all of those are spelled out in the ULDO. And then finally, definitions and rules of construction. This just gets into what we mean when we say shall versus what we mean when we say may in the document. Delegating authority, we often say the administrator may or shall, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't mean, that the planning director or Garrett's going to be he himself doing all these things. They have staff that they can delegate to take care of these duties as well. Go to the next one. There's a lot of definitions in here for certain land uses. When a person is using this document online, which is its ideal format to look at it, If they hover over a certain term, then that definition will pop up there, as you can see in that lower image for the word building. That's what it would look like. They hover over the word building, and then the definition shows for them. The development guidebook is a sort of a quick reference for applicants that gives an even more clear and concise process for any of the development review procedures that are in the ULDO. You can go to the next page. It has a lot of flow charts and images and tables. It also has the applications themselves in it that can be, printed out and filled out, or filled out in Adobe Acrobat, or whatever the preference is for the person submitting it. So as I said, last week at its public hearing, the P&Z voted unanimously to recommend approval of the ULDO to the City Council. And again, no one in the audience spoke in favor or against it. So that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions anyone might have.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Brian. It's been a long process.
Sure has,
Long
yeah,
process.
yeah. October of 2020, I think,
Yeah.
so. And we'll still be working with staff afterwards. There's a 5th phase to this project that will be, and it's a 5-year period, believe it or not. So, and it's much less intense. You probably won't ever see me during that phase, but helping staff, with interpretations and administering the new ULDO, helping them to see anything that might need tweaking in the future. And we'll help, kind of take notes and provide suggested amendments in the future when things come up, because you can't anticipate every scenario in a document like this. There's going to be something that comes up that's weird, that was not anticipated, that will help the staff to deal with.
The ULDO, much like the comp plan, they should be living documents.
Yeah.
And in the past, they have not been. And so by adding that kind of 5th module, we want to make sure that we get in our habits of making this a living document and changing things, small things, as they come up, instead of waiting 60 years and having to redo it all.
Yeah.
20 years is more normal for an overhaul. I mean, cities all the time, as Garrett said, should be maintaining and updating in small ways, but for an overhaul like this, 20 years is about normal. And I've been a planner for right at 21 years, so I've seen things I worked on when I first started come up again that cities want to have updates for. So maybe I can retire in 20 years from now, and this can be my last project.
Yeah, you don't have any plans laid out for drone hubs or paths or anything like that?
Anyone else have anything? Then I guess I'll open the public hearing. If anyone has anything to add or ask. And if not, then I will close the public hearing and entertain a motion.
I move to introduce on first reading ordinance O-006-22, adopting the proposed Unified Land Development Ordinance to replace Chapter 10 subdivisions, Chapter 14 zoning, and Article 1-04 boards and commissions, Division 2 Planning and Zoning Commission, Article 3.13 manufactured homes, and Article 3.14 signs of the Borger Code of Ordinance, and to adopt a new zoning map.
Second.
And all in favor? And it passes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Yes, thank you, Brian.
Item 9, consider and take appropriate action to introduce on first reading ordinance O-007-22, amending the fiscal year 2022 annual budget. Mr. Spradlin.
So it's pretty common for us to make a budget adjustment mid-year after we see how revenues and expenditures are going. And so that's kind of what this does. There are a few things through a couple of funds that I'm going to talk through. In the general fund, the biggest change is sales tax has drastically outperformed our initial budget projections, which, we've talked about pretty much every month for the last, pretty much all this year, so we've been going through that. So this budget will increase $500,000. This amendment will increase that line item by $500,000. There's some other little fee increases, revenue increases based on interest that's coming in higher than expected, and some other property tax and penalty and interest coming in higher, but those are all minor changes. The biggest expenditure is to provide funding for a public safety radio system enhancement. That is a later item on this agenda that we also discussed in our work session. And then the unbudgeted economic development payment for Roosevelt Street. If you remember, several months back, we executed a Chapter 380 agreement with HTO for the extension of Roosevelt Street. So that was a $60,000 payment. Of course, the nice thing about that is we paid $60,000 and got a $140,000 road. So that we get to actually take that entire asset, the whole $147,000 will hit our balance sheet. But it only costs us $60,000, but we did need to account for that. So in the general fund, we're increasing revenues by a total of $594,605. We're increasing expenditures by a total of $207,236, which gives us a net positive impact on the general fund of $387,369. If you recall, we budgeted the general fund in the negative this year to use fund balance to pay off the first fire engine that we got this year, so this will help offset some of that negative balance. And actually, at the way the general fund is performing right now, we do expect to end the year well to the positive, even though we had budgeted to the negative, so we will outperform that entire negative. In the water and sewer fund, there are really just two main changes. The first is in revenue. So again, we underestimated the water sales to Phillips 66 this year. So this adjusts that by a little over $1 million. And then the biggest expenditure increase is a little flub up on my behalf. If you remember, we did budget a fund drawdown from the fund balance to build 2 water wells, to add 2 water wells to the Northwest well field. I budgeted the revenue coming into Fund 52, but I forgot to add the revenue coming out of Fund 2. So that does correct that. However, that transfer was about $3.2 million. So with the increased revenue, we're only going to need to transfer out 2.7. Also part of that 2.7 is, if you remember, 3 months back, we approved the purchase of a new sewer vacuum truck for the to the tune of $470,000 for the sewer maintenance. Mainly because it had a significant lead time. So we're going to go ahead and transfer, what I suggest doing is transferring the money from this current budget with the increased revenue. We'll move it into the fund reserves of Fund 51 to pay for that when it comes in, instead of paying for it out of the operating budget next year that we had initially planned on. In Fund 3, the tourism fund, that is mainly some cleanup. We're not spending any more money on the dome, but because the project was delayed, we spent more money this year and less money last year. So that line item is way under budgeted based on how much we spent this year. But like I said, the overall cost of the project didn't go up. It's just cleaning up the budget in which year we did it. The same thing is partially true for the venue fund. There again, we spent less last year, and so we ended up spending more this year than what was budgeted. So we're mainly cleaning up that line item. And then we added some revenue. Now that the facility is open, we actually have revenue coming in, so we needed to budget for a little bit of revenue coming in. And so that's the revenue increase, 27.5, and then the expenditure increase of a little over $1.5 million. Remember, we did issue bonds of $2 million in the venue fund for that payment, so we just didn't spend it all last year, so it's getting spent this year. The capital construction fund, we're increasing revenues in that by $1.877 million. That's to account for the coronavirus local fiscal recovery funding that we received. If you remember when we budgeted, we took that as deferred revenue because we weren't for sure what the requirements were going to be, so we didn't want to take it and account for it as revenue until we knew we could spend it unrestricted. And so they did come up with those new guidances, and cities, any amount up to $10 million could be considered. They gave how they do on your taxes, how you get a standard deduction. They gave cities a standard credit of up to $10 million to take as lost revenue. So any amount up to $10 million we could claim as lost revenue without any further justification. Our total allotment was just a little over $3 million, so that of course is less than 10 million, so we were able to actually log that as revenue. So this line item adjusts that, so that it is in revenue. That will hit the fund balance, and we'll use that to justify or to budget for future capital expenditures as we go through the capital budgets. And then in the equipment fund, it probably had the most kind of big swings, but if you recall, we prepaid a new aerial ladder truck for $1.5 million, and then we issued debt to help offset that. So we needed to increase both the revenue and the expenditure side of that. So we have the $1 million coming in from debt. There's a $500,000 transfer that the council authorized or indicated that you wanted to transfer $500,000 from reserve to offset the total amount of the loan that we issued for that truck. And so that's in there. And so that gives us the revenue increase of 1.5 million and then the expenditure increase of 1.5 to kind of offset that. There's a little bit of a difference, but the fund balance will take up that. But that's the bulk of the major changes in the budget. Does that make sense? Any questions? There is the detailed line item report back behind there, but I didn't feel necessary to go through each little line item, just hit the summary.
Does anyone have anything? You answered my questions on what I had, so. If there's no questions, then I'll entertain a motion.
I move to introduce on first reading ordinance O-007-22, amending the fiscal year 2022 annual budget.
Second.
All in favor? And it passes. And item 10, consider and take appropriate action to authorize the purchase of group services in a 2-channel capacity upgrade to the public safety radio system from Motorola Solutions for the amount of $147,236, utilizing the HGAC Cooperative Purchase Contract number 17724. Mr. Whistler.
Council. So what we're looking at doing is, as you know, we've implemented the new public safety radio system within City of Borger and Hudson County. We're looking to expand on some of those capacities, some of the new features of that radio system, specifically adding additional channel capacity, which over the 4th of July weekend was a great example because we did have a few occurrences to where we did overload the existing system capacity minorly. So we've been looking into doing this for a little bit now. We finally got the numbers to present to y'all. Currently, we have the Borger Dispatch Center, who we dispatch for about 12, 13 public safety agencies. Depends if you count Texas Parks and Wildlife, since they infrequently come in. But we can still only communicate with them concurrently, 3 different agencies at the same time. This will double. The 2 channels actually provides 4 additional talk paths, so it allows us to talk to not everybody at the same time, but there's not really much of a need for that, but we can at least talk to our core agencies, and of course for the City of Borger, that's our police, fire, and EMS. The Sheriff's Department obviously would be another one, and Fritz and Stinnett. So we're going to cover all of our big players with this expansion if approved. Group services is another feature set with the radio system. And keep in mind, these aren't the traditional walkie-talkies that we may have been used to, playing with back when we were kids. The radios don't even really transmit voice, they transmit data packets. And what we're looking at doing with the group services, that will allow some enhancements for radio identification. So we're partners with this radio system with the public safety agencies in Amarillo, Randall, and Potter. When they come over here or we go over there, it'll help us to identify them. If we don't hear who they said they were, we'll be able to see on the radio display what their call sign was, whether it be on the portable radios or on the mobile radios. Group services will also allow telecommunicators, dispatchers to be able to send out basically text notifications to an agency over their radios. There's a thunderstorm watch or something of that effect, or there's a prescribed fire schedule for this location. And they don't have to tie up the radio because they'll be able to do that, basically literally through a text messaging service. Lastly, group services also allows some other features for over-the-air programming.
Currently, we can program radios by Wi-Fi at any of the city buildings. The over-the-air would be maybe for a resource, a radio that's somewhere outside of our immediate programming, our Wi-Fi area, say in Amarillo. And then Chief Davis was working a feature maybe with an event over there helping their motors units. We could actually push out a radio update over the system without having to physically touch the radio or have them come into the police department. The group services is estimated at about, let me see, the total package is $147,000. Group services was about $27,000. That is a one-time, it's a non-recurring fee. The remainder is for the 2 channels at about $119,000. There would be a percentage of that for maintenance and warranty, keeping it up to date and basically future-proofing it. So in a nutshell, that's the proposal for the radio system enhancements for the police, fire, EMS.
Okay. Thank you, Jason. Anyone have any questions for?
I think we picked his brain earlier today.
Yeah.
If not, then I'll entertain a motion. Thank you, Jason.
I move to authorize the purchase of group services and a 2-channel capacity upgrade to the public safety radio system from Motorola Solutions for the amount of $147,236, utilizing the HGAC Cooperative Purchase Contract number 17724.
Second. All in favor? And it passes. And item 11, consider and take appropriate action to approve the solicitation provision, terms and conditions, scope of work, specifications, et cetera, for solicitation number 00002687 related to the Pantex City of Borger radar project and authorizing the city manager to execute all required documents. Mr. Whistler.
So some of y'all may remember, back in 2006, the city of Borger purchased a radar system. And it's located actually up north of, just north of Stinnett on the high ground. Couple of quick benefits of why they did this and why this is still a viable option. First of all, being up north of Stinnett, I'm sure y'all have seen on the Amarillo radar, like right over where that radar sits, there's this cone of silence, is kind of what they call it. The radars can't look straight up. So they installed that radar north of Stinnett because it's just far enough out that it can really see everything that's approaching the city of Borger, so we don't have our cone of silence. The other thing too is even though everybody's got radar on their phones, and it may show that it just updated a few, 30 seconds ago, it updated 30 seconds ago with data that is anywhere between 6 to 15 minutes old. And with the way that our storms are on the Texas Panhandle, these storms come really fast, and then 6 to 15 minute delay that, you could be thinking that storm's at Fritch and it's already right on top of you. So that's the quick background on this radar that was purchased in 2006.
Because I'll add to that just real quick, is the way the Weather Service radar works, the next rate radar in Amarillo, is it takes a full path and then it consolidates and crunches that data before it shows anything. So like what you see on the news a lot with the little sweep line going and it's showing things, that's not how the Weather Service radar works. So even the console at the Weather Service, it takes them 4 to 6 minutes before they see the newest data. Then all these radar services that we subscribe to or that's on your phone, the Weather Service then uploads it to a third-party server who then has to process it and push it out. And so that's where you get that delay. So in 05, we pushed for that other radar because an average thunderstorm in this part of the country is moving 45 miles an hour. So in 10 minutes, that thing can be 3 miles difference. The solid state radar in Stinnett has no delay and no processing. So where it says it is, it is.
And as you can imagine, with 2006 technology nowadays, it's very outdated. And actually, some years ago, it became very problematic, and it has continued to be problematic to this day, being an older system and it hasn't been updated. We've been talking with some of you that may remember Steve Kirsch, worked with Channel 7 meteorologist. He's working at Pantex now, and we've been trying to work with him for probably better part of last year on coming up to this point now. What they're proposing is to actually reimburse the city of Borger for the maintenance, the upgrading, refurbishment of that radar system. To actually take the master control to the Pantex plant to where they can control it. And the beauty is they can't look at anything over the Pantex if that radar doesn't come right over Borger. So it still provides that instantaneous radar feed to us. And basically, they would still provide us with what they call they're going to have the master, we'll have a slave unit, our passive unit at the EOC. So we'll still be able to utilize the radar. I confess, I think I'm wonderful, but when it comes to radar operations, I can't compete with Steve Kirsch. I mean, he's a meteorologist, that's what he does. So it's a good tool in their hands. And even though there is some initial expense to us, it's fully reimbursed and maintained by the Pantex Department of Energy. So basically, that's what they're proposing, is to take over as not ownership, keep in mind, but just the primary maintenance, upkeep, and operation of that unit, and still provide us access to it and provide us reimbursement for this roughly $125,000 upfront cost to upgrade it. And like I said, they've agreed to reimburse us up to $150,000. Just supply chain issues and everything seems to be creeping up in prices. So as long as we don't go over $150,000, and there's actually no expense to upgrading this radar and the benefits to the community.
So based on how this is working, the documents are a little funny because we are, in theory, are going to become a service provider for the federal government. And so that's why, when you look at some of the terms of all of this, so that's why they have a scope of work. So that scope of work outlines what they want done and what needs to be done to get the radar to meet their specs. And then we agree to do that, and in exchange, they will pay us the service amount. So it all washes out. I just kind of want to throw that out there because these documents are not,
They're not traditional.
normally we're the customer, not the supplier, but in this instance, we're kind of operating as the supplier. And then I will say, the one thing I put caveat in there, I put is going forward, if any one of the components or the work goes over $50,000, you might see another item in a future agenda to award that expenditure for the work. But it's very much like what we do for TIFMAS or all those things where, we expend the money up front and then they reimburse us behind. So it's not anything like that, but it does, we still get to retain the asset and increase the usability of it, so.
Yeah, and I believe the expertise, I think it's good to be able to have an extra meteorologist. We've got a great working relationship with the National Weather Service as it is. This just adds one more tool in the toolkit and extra personnel we can rely on, so.
Definitely a great example of a partnership where a partnership saves both people money.
Correct me, I'm probably wrong, but didn't we already do, I thought we already.
We've talked about this, but we haven't taken any action,
Yeah.
so it's taken,
We did a lightning agreement
Oh,
with
okay.
that lightning sensor
thought we did
that they put
something
on
with
some of our
that. Okay.
property. Yes.
Okay.
Is that what is that at the Lamb Yard?
Yeah, that's part of
That's
their
what that
lighting
is?
array.
Okay.
And so when you say the scope of work, I guess that's to bring it up to where it's usable? Is that what you're saying?
It's, the scope of work basically outlines, and it's actually not a terrible document, I won't read it to you, but it basically outlines that we're going to upgrade this radar unit, they're gonna reimburse us, and just a quick.
like, there's some electrical work that needs to be done, there's some site improvements that need to be done, the RT unit needs repaired.
And it just benefits us to get it, I mean, because then you already access this, or is that what you're saying?
We would.
Yeah, we will have access to it. Right now, it's not actually
It's
a
not.
very viable
Oh,
option
okay.
to us. It's very problematic.
I see.
The tower that it's on, and it's not properly grounded, so we're
So
gonna
it
bring up
we-
that grounding and everything. It almost kind of
So
reminds me of
really,
the
it's
Uniform
something we
Land
need to
Development.
do, but we're just going to be reimbursed for it.
Now it's not gonna, literally, it won't cost us anything.
We've been debating whether or not we need to invest money into it, or we just decommission it. And so this way, it costs us no money, but we
Yeah.
get to retain use of it.
Okay.
The scope of work actually is contained on page 3, and it's this little bitty paragraph, which basically indicates that they have a need for a radar, and we have a radar.
Okay.
The radar will still be owned by us, while they will basically reimburse for the maintenance. And everything else is definitions and,
Okay.
like I said, it's kind of like a uniform land development.
Okay. I
So-
just kind of was curious if I understood correctly, so, all right.
Yeah, basically, we get upgraded without cost, any out-of-pocket cost. It gets upgraded, not only to its previous condition, but they're actually adding some enhancements to it. And somebody that is better and knowledgeable of radar systems.
Absolutely.
Steve had mentioned that he worked on similar radar systems, has for 20, 25 years. So he's pretty familiar with it. So.
Sounds good.
And it's always good to keep that good working relationship up with Pantex. So.
Absolutely.
I always kind of laugh that, we work so hard with the industries, but, the industries, and rightfully so, they employ a lot of people, but, they're upwind from us. We're always so worried about, what happens out there, but most of the time they're upwind. We don't think about Pantex, but we're downwind for Pantex. And anything that happens in Pantex
Yeah.
is coming right for us.
We don't have-
I'm not saying it will, I'm just, my point there is that sometimes it's good to open our eyes and work with some of the other industries a little farther out than just right immediately to us.
Yeah.
And Pantex is a good resource for a lot of different things.
Thank you, Jason.
Questions? Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments or anything? If not, then I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve the provisions for solicitation number 00000022687
It's the federal
related to the Pantex City of Borger radar project, authorizing expenditures for the project in an amount not to exceed $150,000, and authorize the city manager to execute all required documents.
Second.
All in favor? And it passes. Item 12, consider and take appropriate action to adjourn.
I make a motion that we adjourn.
Second. All in favor? And we have adjourned. Thank you all for coming today.